Thanks for joining us. We are here with Dr. Walter McDougall, author of the forthcoming book titled The Mighty Continent, A Candid History of Modern Europe, to be published by Creed and Culture on January 20th, 2026. Just sent the proofs back to the printer. So it is being printed as we speak or very soon anyway. Walter, thanks for doing this today.
Thanks very much, Jeremy, for having me on.
Got a few questions for you. We're going to try to keep this to close to 10 minutes. And I'll start with the sort of big picture question. In your preface, you mentioned how the academic discipline of history has become distorted by, for lack of a better word, wokeness. How has that sort of ideological approach affected our view of Europe and European history?
Jeremy, I've taught for 50 years, and I have witnessed all of these terrible trends. The distortion of pedagogy began during the 1960s, the youth revolt against real and imagined ills in the history of Western civilization, racism, imperialism, sexism, and whatnot. And academic scholars who were influenced by Marxism or the civil rights movement rendered a priori judgments to the effect that Europeans were responsible for nearly all the evils of modern history. Then they proceeded to cherry pick evidence in support of that judgment. The distortion deepened in the 1990s with the advent of political correctness, remember that? And of course, wokeness. Now, meanwhile, we senior historians who'd been trained to aspire to objectivity began to retire one by one, whereupon our younger colleagues seized control of history departments and hired like-minded scholars in trendy fields such as race, class, gender, and sexual orientation. Professors who studied and taught political, diplomatic, economic, and intellectual history became increasingly rare. Now, the question blowing in the wind, I'm a big Bob Dylan
You're a
fan.
Dylan guy, yes.
Yeah, is why? Why are postmodern intellectuals so dismissive of the civilization their own ancestors built? Why do they condemn institutions and values which still attract millions of immigrants from other parts of the world? Well, what the postmodern critics ignore is the fact that the very values they invoke in order to condemn Western civ, such as freedom, equality, social justice, toleration, human rights, feminism, environmentalism, are themselves inventions of Western civilization. Now, Jacques Ellul, a 20th century scholar, wrote eloquently about this question. He granted that Europeans had been imperialistic, but he added that every civilization has pursued conquest whenever it got the upper hand. Now, what was distinctive about Europeans was their invention of anti-imperialism. Ellul granted that Europeans had enslaved people of color, but he added that all civilizations have known some form of involuntary servitude at some point. What was distinctive about Europeans was their invention of abolitionism. Right. He granted that Westerners had been a patriarchy, but what was distinctive about Europeans was their invention of women's liberation. Ellul granted that Europeans have habitually waged wars of conquest, but he added that every nation or empire has been belligerent at some point. What was distinctive about Europeans was their invention of international law, self-determination, and human rights. So that's pretty much what's happened to our profession.
It's the historical illiteracy actually leads to trying to explain the wrong things.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's trying to explain it's not conquest, slave taking, and violence that needs to be explained. It's the fact that some civilization invented cultural restraints.
That's right. Now I teach diplomatic history, and I tell my students pointedly, what needs to be, the liberal mindset tries to explain war. Why is there war? How can we get rid of war?
Right.
But I explain to my students that what really needs explaining is why sometimes there is peace.
Right, exactly.
And of course, the two great influences on modern Europe were the Judeo-Christian religious tradition and the Enlightenment intellectual tradition. And our nation, the United States of America, once upon a time, was built on those two traditions.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, you were quoting Jacques Ellul there in your answer to that first question I posed you, and he comes up in the last chapter of The Mighty Continent as you sort of sum up 500 plus years, really more than that, of
Right.
European history. But you begin the book by talking about two fundamental kind of concepts, and these become threads you sort of weave throughout the narrative, which is just really great, by the way, grand sweeping narrative that somehow you make coherent all of European history. And the two concepts are themis and techne. So my question is, what do you mean by these terms, and how do they help us understand European history?
I borrowed a techne and themis from the Harvard sociologist Daniel Bell
Hmm.
because I realized it was a very useful heuristic device. Now, Bell asked in a classic essay, which I think he wrote in the late 60s, what it was which distinguishes modern people like us from the people who lived in ancient times, ancient Greece, for instance. Well, Bell stressed the obvious fact that today's technology would seem magical to the ancients. So radically has the human command over nature increased. But he also stressed the often forgotten fact that people today still confront the same timeless mysteries as the ancients, such as where did the world come from? What is the meaning of life, if there is one? How can we learn to love? And what happens after we die? That thematic side of civilizations, as opposed to the technical side,
Hmm.
are expressed, of course, in culture and art and religion and moral codes. But under the impress of modernity, Europeans and then Americans and then most of the world became increasingly ignorant or dismissive of the things of Themis.
Yeah.
Suffice to say that the most violent century in human history was the terrible, terrible 20th century. The century when the Germany of Nietzsche and Adolf Hitler replaced the Germany of Brahms and Beethoven. Where are our great composers today? Where are the great artists, the great sculptors? Architecture has become ugly. The era that we've been living through, I call the era of uglification. So generally, the main theme was that as techne advanced over the course of modern history, themis retreated.
Yeah. And you tell that story very, very well in The Mighty Continent. Um, One more question for you, Walter, before I let you go.
Okay.
We'll get down to get directly to European history here. What is something most people, and not just academics, um, misunderstand or don't appreciate about the story of modern Europe? And to be very clear to everybody, modern Europe, we're talking about basically from the Reformations to until the
Right.
fall of the Berlin
Right.
Wall. For
One,
yeah,
one, one might begin with the Renaissance, in which the
okay,
Reformation was an
yeah,
offshoot. What's something that most people, not just academics, misunderstand or don't appreciate is that Europeans are no different than anyone else. Hey, nobody's perfect. Europeans are pretty much share the same human nature as people in other cultures. We're all flawed. We're all prone to error. And in biblical terms, we are all sinful before a holy God. Now, the word sin in Hebrew simply means missing the mark, like an archer who never can quite hit the bullseye. It doesn't mean you have to be really evil to be sinful.
mm-hmm.
So human nature is universal. But Europe, however, has also been the most inventive, inquisitive, creative, and restless of civilizations on this planet. Indeed, one might say that the European faith and progress, which can be traced back to the High Middle Ages, inspired first the Renaissance of the 15th and 16th centuries, and then modernity, modernity in all of its forms.
Yeah,
Europeans invented the modern world.
and is the world in which we all live, which is why it's worth reading the story This book, the only really, as far as I know, like narrative grand history of this sort of era of European life that's really out there today. So I really encourage people to pick up The Mighty Continent, A Candid History of Modern Europe. It's available for pre-order right now at creedandculture.com. It's also available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, everywhere else. And you'll have it in your hands in January. Walter
Great.
McDougall, thank you very much.
Thank you. I've really
Appreciate it.
enjoyed it.
Thank you. All right, we're good. Our my young woman who knows how to do this stuff will now edit that and and the back end and the front end and get it online. So thanks. Yeah,
Great.
I'm really excited to send the proofs back last week. So fingers crossed and knock on wood. It's always the scariest moment when you're publishing. It's like,
Yeah.
well, that's it.
All right. I wish Creed and Culture a great success.
Thank you very much. We're off to a good start, thanks to you, frankly. I mean, being able to tell people that we had signed you as basically our first author. Um, we're getting, yeah, I'm getting great authors. Just being able to advance. We're not paying, $50,000 advances, but being able to pay advances of some kind, a few $1,000s, really it helps. And then, yeah, people like to be associated with other people like you. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day, Walter. We'll see you.
You too. Bye bye.